Thank you, worship team. Thank you, Bella, for leading us this morning in Susan's absence. Susan is celebrating a birthday for one of her grandchildren, 1 year, so they're having a blast, I'm sure. So that's exciting. Also, we'll pray for all this a little bit, but I want to ask you to keep Shakira in mind and pray for her. Shakira is our communications director. She lives in D.C. She attends church in D.C., so she doesn't attend here. So most of you have never met Shakira, but anytime you get a newsletter or a text from our church, or you go to log in to sign up for something online, Shakira's the one that's making all of that stuff happening behind the scenes. And she has a lot going on right now. She is a single young lady in her late 20s. And I told you about 6 months ago that she started fostering a 6-month-old, or a newborn. He's now 6 months old, and planning to adopt. In fact, that is in process right now. The adoption process is happening right now. He had some minor surgery this past week and did fine, but then some complications. So she was in and out of emergency room all weekend with him. And on top of that, last week she texted us. Our staff just asked us to pray because DC Social Services had contacted her and asked her if she could take in a 2-week-old that had been abandoned. And she said, no, I can't do that. And then they called her back after calling over 100 people on their list and couldn't find anyone. So she's taken him in, and she is on track to adopt him as well. So, wow, right? But super proud of her for taking that on. She has great family support. Her mom and dad both live very close to her, kind of a couple blocks away. She's got aunts and uncles that are all around, and it's an all hands on deck kind of a thing. But she's doing incredible raising these two young boys who came from really, really difficult circumstances. So just pray for her throughout all that. And every time you get an email, just remember to pray for her, right? Just remember, Shakira sent this to me, and I'm going to pray for her and those two boys. So with that said, a couple announcements. Circle Fridays are coming up this Friday. So if you're planning to come to that, we'd love to have you. Sign up. You can click the QR code in front of you, and that'll take you to the link. It's just a great opportunity for you to connect with some other people and get to know some other people. And then our meal pack fundraiser that's coming up, Mary Beth's going to come and talk to us a little bit about that and what you need to know about all that.
Good morning. Just so you all know, we do a meal pack in the fall, and we partner with Feed My Starving Children for that. And just so you know the issue that's going on, millions of children die from preventable causes every year, like pneumonia, malaria, and undernutrition. Hunger is still causing nearly half of deaths in children under 5 years old. And Feed My Starving Children believes that around 6,200 children die each day from causes related to undernutrition. So they're working to prevent that. They have these nutritious Manna Pack meals, which is what we pack, and they are specifically designed to assist in reversing and preventing undernutrition. And then they also work with partners to distribute those, and those partners stay in the communities for the long haul, empowering to help them move from relief to development. And so we need to raise money for our meal pack because we pay for all the meals that we pack, which is around 100,000 meals each year. And so one way you can do that is to help us raise money. And a fun way is through the cabaret. It's going to be this Saturday at 7 o'clock. And as you all probably know, we have a lot of talent in this church. Some of it you see on Sundays, some of it you don't. So it'll be a fun treat. And we'll also have really delicious desserts. So if you haven't gotten your ticket yet, we encourage you to do that soon so we can make sure to have enough seats and dessert for everyone. You can do that with a QR code in front of you, or we'll be out in the lobby and you can go ahead and reserve your tickets with us. If you can't come, we encourage you to still donate to our meal pack to help us raise the money. And we hope to see you there. Thanks.
Thanks, Mary Beth. So let's go to God in prayer this morning. God, we just thank you for just a beautiful day to worship you, and we just pray that you would just help us to just step into this moment and focus on who you are and just remove some of the distractions that are in our lives. We do pray that you would be with Shakira, and as she works to raise these two little boys, and just to give them the safety and the protection and the love and the care that they need. We thank you for our entire family who are stepping in to this moment in their lives to make a difference. And so just give them everything that they need. And then, God, we do lift up our small groups that are meeting, our Circle Friday that's going to be meeting. We just pray for connections to be made and relationships to be built so that we can just care for each other and grow spiritually together. And then we do want to just lift up our meal pack, even though it's a long way away, and just pray for the resources. We thank you for Feed My Starving Children and the ministry that they have, and our opportunity to step into that and be a part of what they do in this small way. So just bless everything that we do there. In Christ's name I pray, amen. So first of all, I apologize for the warmth. It's a little warm. Anybody? Some of y'all are super comfortable and you're like, this is what we've been waiting for a long time, because it's usually about 65 degrees in here. Our air conditioning, we discovered it was out Thursday. They can't get to it till early this coming week, so hopefully by next week it'll be ready. But thankfully it dropped into the 70s, like it was 80 yesterday. I think it'll be 80 tomorrow, so we kind of got right squeezed in the middle, so it's at least tolerable. But anyway, it's great to be here. We're in our series where we're just talking about our emotions and how to control them so that they don't control us. And today we're actually going to talk about 3 emotions that can control us if we don't control them. We're going to talk about anger, loneliness, and fear, things that we've all experienced and all will experience again. And we're going to look at a small part of the story of David. His story in the Old Testament is an incredible story. It has a lot of twists and turns to it. There's a lot of drama if you go and read the whole thing. It spans a lot of years if you look at the chronology of it all. And so today we're gonna drop into his story kind of right after he's killed Goliath. We all remember the story of David and Goliath. And at this point, he's pretty much the most popular person in Israel. And as we jump into this story, we're going to be reminded of something that I think is relevant to all of us. Either right now, in this season that we're in right now, or certainly sometime in the future, this is going to be relevant at some point. And here's what we're going to discover, that the ways of God are most unappealing to us and seemingly irrelevant to us when we are either angry, lonely, or afraid. That the ways of God are most unappealing to us. We don't even want to move in that direction, or they seem just irrelevant whenever we're experiencing these emotions in a significant way: angry, lonely, or afraid. These 3 conditions have the potential to undermine the resolve of even the most dedicated, devout, disciplined person among us. And these 3 conditions have the potential to cause us just to crash through every one of our moral and ethical boundaries that we set up for ourselves. And the reason is this: when these 3 emotions become the boss of us, when they become the boss of us and we're overwhelmed by these emotions, we feel like we just have to do something, right? There's almost this sense of panic of I got to do something to fix this. I've got to do something to change this. I've got to do something to relieve this tension that I'm feeling. And oftentimes when we do that, we do the wrong thing, or we rely on our instincts, or we do what we did the last time and that we thought worked, or what we've done before, and we just do what comes naturally to us. And as a result, most of the times things don't get better, they get worse. There's not less regret, typically there's more regret. Things don't get less complicated, our lives tend to get more complicated, as we're going to see. We end up angrier, we end up lonelier, and we end up scareder. And I realize I just made up a word, so don't text me that I made a mistake. But anyway, now the story of David. If you read the story, David had 2 huge, really public failures in his life. And one he's very, very famous for. You've probably heard of this story. He was in his 50s. Her name was Bathsheba, right? Some of us have heard that story. But the failure we're going to look at today is not so well known. It happened when he was in his 20s. He was around 22 years old when this happened. So this is a huge failure that he's not famous for. And it's one, I think, one of the most interesting and maybe one of the most dramatic stories in the Old Testament. So following the defeat of Goliath, he was 15 years old. Okay? David was 15 years old, and he became this legend in Israel. And King Saul, he realizes that David has a lot of potential. He also realizes that because of his status now, he has a lot of influence and he has a lot of power. And also, something that's important for the story to keep in mind is, at this point, King Saul, he was very, very insecure as a person. And so he comes up with a plan, and it might have been a good plan if David hadn't have been who David was. Saul decided he's going to get David into his family so that he can control him. And so he offers one of his daughters to him in marriage. And David's response was really, really interesting. He essentially says to King Saul, he says, King Saul, he said, I don't think I'm worthy to be the king's son-in-law. And maybe he thought that because he didn't come from really wealthy, well-known, powerful, prestigious family. Or maybe he thought that because he was 15 years old, right? I don't know. So David refuses King's offer to be the king's son-in-law. And now all the people are even more impressed with him because, who would refuse that? That's a chance of a lifetime. He's so humble, right? And so time goes by. And Saul is continuing to look for ways to control David. And eventually David falls in love with one of King Saul's other daughters. Her name was Michal. And they end up getting married. And then he becomes best friends with King Saul's son, Jonathan. And the next thing you know, King Saul realizes that getting this kid into my family maybe wasn't the smartest idea after all, because he's so influential now. Everybody loves David. Even my family all loves David. And now Saul gets to be very, very, very jealous of David. Well, time goes by. About 7 years goes by. And during this time, this 7-year period, David is kind of in favor with Saul and out of favor. In favor, out of favor. And it just goes back and forth. And finally, one day, Saul's finally had enough of it all. And he discovers that every time he tries to have David secretly arrested, that his own son Jonathan, or his daughter that she married, helps David to kind of get away. And David just keeps slipping through Saul's fingers. And so Saul's frustration, it just builds and builds and builds. And finally, it all comes to a head one night at dinner. And now dinner was the big meal of the day. And dinner with the king was a really, really big deal. It was an extraordinary honor to have dinner with the king. And David had typically been invited and typically showed up for dinner. But during these last few turbulent years, David had been missing dinner all the time. And Saul would ask his son, where's David? And Jonathan would kind of cover for him and make excuses. So one night at dinner, the whole family is gathered around this big dinner table. And it's a big deal. And King Saul loses it. I mean, he just explodes on everybody. And here's what the text tells us happens. That this is, and by the way, this is one of those things, if you've got young kids and you read to them bedtime stories and you read part of the Bible as part of that at night, this is one of the passages you probably just want to skip over for now, come back to it later. But here's what happened. It says, Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan, and he said to him, "You son of a perverse and rebellious woman, you." Now, that's pretty strong language, isn't it? And it's at the dinner table with the family, and I hope that perverse and rebellious woman wasn't sitting at the dinner table that particular night, right? But he says, "You son of a perverse and rebellious woman, you. Don't I know that you had sided with this son, with the son of Jesse?" So Saul's just had it. And he's like, I'm tired of pretending. I know that everybody at this table is working against me here. They're sided with this shepherd boy and against me as the king. He says, "Don't I know that you've sided with the son of Jesse? To your own shame and to the shame of," like, is she here? Do I see her? Where is she? That mother who bore you, Jonathan. I think there must have been some marriage issues here between the king and his wife. Don't you think so? And as long as the son of Jesse, he's Saul speaking again, lives on this earth, and Saul is about to get to the real issue here. The thing that's really bothering him. He says, "Jonathan, as long as David is on this earth," he says, "neither you nor your kingdom." He's talking to Jonathan, and Saul viewed Jonathan as the next king of Israel. He was next in line. And he sees Jonathan as next king, and he wants his legacy to last. It says, "Neither you, Jonathan, nor your kingdom will be established. Now send someone to bring him to me, for David must die." And then Saul storms out of the room. And Jonathan, he goes and he finds David, and he essentially says to David, David, he said, I got bad news. He said, you don't just have to leave town. He said, you've got to leave the country. He said, my father is not going to stop until he finds you, has you arrested, and kills you. So you've got to get out of town. And he's too threatened by your reputation. He's too threatened by your influence. So you've got to leave. David was 22 years old when all this happened. And all of a sudden, he's afraid for his life. He's alone. He's been rejected by the man that he's risked his life for over and over again. And he feels rejected by the nation that he's risked his life for over and over and over again. And so he feels abandoned, and he's lonely, and he's afraid. And he did what many of us do when we're lonely, angry, and afraid. David panicked. And he decided he's going to take matters into his own hands. And I said that's what we do naturally too, right? And David, he lost sight of something, and it's hard for us to imagine this, but he lost sight of the fact that God was on his side, that God was with him. And here's why that's hard for us to understand. Is because when we read these stories in the Bible, particularly this story of David, we're reading it from 30,000 feet, right? I mean, we know how the story's going to end. And so it's like, why would you do that, David? Why would you make that decision? Why would you panic? Why would you run? Why would you abandon your faith? Why would you abandon your morals and your ethics and think that God wasn't with you? And I can't help but think, maybe there are people who are watching us right now in our lives, and they're wondering the same thing about us, right? There are people watching us as we struggle with these same emotions when we're lonely or angry or we're afraid, and they're watching us, and they're wondering, why would you do that? Why would you go there? Why would you make that decision? In fact, let's be honest. You can probably look back on a season of your own life now that you've had some time to think about it and put it in context, and you can probably ask your own self, why did I do that? Why would I go there? Why would I call them back? Why would I say yes to that invitation? Why did I spend that money? Why did I take on that debt? What's going on with me? Well, it's really simple that when we feel lonely, angry, and afraid, those things are controlling us. Those things have become the boss of us. And they're naturally telling us what to do, and our natural inclination is to panic, and that's what David did. So back to the story. It says, David went to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. Now, Nob is where the tabernacle is. This is a city, and it's where the tabernacle was. It's where they were worshiping God. The tabernacle kind of was before the temple, and it moved around different cities, and at this point, that's where it was. So this is where they worshiped and made sacrifices to God. And so when David showed up, it says, Ahimelech the priest, he trembled when he met him and asked him, David, why are you alone? Why is no one with you? And he was trembling, and he asked those questions because here's the deal. When David showed up, you heard him before you saw him. Because David traveled with 1,000 personal warriors every time he went anywhere. And Ahimelech, he's never seen David by himself. And all of a sudden, David shows up. He's acting a little weird, and he's a little nervous. He's by himself, and he's looking around, and he's going, okay, what is going on? Right? And David, and so David answers Ahimelech, and he lies to the high priest, and he knows that he's lying to the high priest, and he knows that what he's about to do is a violation of the law of God, God's moral standards. In fact, I mean, think about this. He's lying to the high priest, and they're in the tabernacle. And wherever the tabernacle went, remember what was with the tabernacle? The Ark of the Covenant. And you remember one of the things that was in the Ark of the Covenant? The original stone 10 commandments. David could have literally walked over and read on the original commandments, thou shalt not lie, right? And so here he is. He lies, and it's not even a good lie, but he lies because he feels lonely, he's angry, and he's afraid, and those things were controlling him, and he panicked, and when he panicked, he stepped away from what he knew was right and what he knew was true. And here's what he says. David answered Ahimelech the priest, the king has sent me on a mission and said to me, no one is to know anything about the mission I'm sending you on. He just lies. I'm on a secret mission, right? The lie continues. As for my men, I've told them to meet me in a certain place. I mean, he's not even a good liar, is he? I mean, this is just so lame, the story that he's telling Ahimelech. He didn't have any men, but he's afraid, and he's afraid that if he tells the truth, then the priest isn't going to help him the way he needs it. And here's a spoiler. This lie that David told, this lie would cost not David, this lie would cost Ahimelech and his entire family their lives. So the story continues. He says, "Now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever you can find." So now David, he's here without food. He's hungry, and Ahimelech is thinking, this is just really, really weird. You're by yourself. You're hungry. You've got no supplies, no provisions. You know, the king's son-in-law, you're the captain of the king's bodyguard, and you show up on a secret mission, and your men are hidden somewhere and all that stuff. And here's how the priest responds. He says, "But the priest answered David, I don't have any ordinary bread on hand. However, there is some consecrated bread here." Now, let me explain what this is real quick. Every Sabbath, the priest would bake fresh bread. And this doesn't make sense to us because we've never been a part of a sacrificial system. But they would bake fresh bread every Sabbath, and they would place it on the altar. It was their way of offering God fresh bread. And then the next morning, they would wake up and they would go back to the altar, and lo and behold, God hasn't eaten any of the bread, right? So the priests themselves would eat the bread, and only the priests were allowed to eat the bread because it was consecrated bread, and you had to be ceremonially clean at all times in order to eat it. So Elimelech says to David, he says, "We don't have like any normal food around here. All we've got is this consecrated bread, but if you're ceremonially clean and you want the consecrated bread, then you can have it." And again, David lies again to him, and he says that in fact he was ceremonially clean when he wasn't, and so the priest gives him the consecrated bread. And now David's not only lied about why he's there, he's now lying so that he can be fed. And then, if all of this wasn't crazy enough, this is where the story takes a really, really crazy turn. I mean, there's so much drama in this part of the story. There's no way we can fully grasp it all. But David asked Ahimelech, "Don't you have a spear or a sword here?" He says, "I haven't brought my sword or any weapon because the king's mission was so urgent." And this is where Ahimelech probably knew something was really, really up and really, really wrong, because here's David. I mean, he's the greatest warrior in all of Israel. And he's showing up by himself, no supplies. He's hungry, and he doesn't even have a weapon with him. I mean, it makes no sense. And then what happens next is David is virtually transported back in time. David is virtually transported back in time to the very event that God used to catapult him to the fame that he has today. And this should have been a wake-up call for David, that he was on the wrong path. This should have been a moment when he stopped and said, "What in the world am I doing here? And why am I even considering these options?" This was the moment when his eyes should have been open. He's asking for a spear. He's asking for a sword. And check this out. The priest replied, "The sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you killed, David, 7 years ago." Remember that? The sword of Goliath, the Philistine, is here. It's here in the tabernacle. I mean, can you imagine the drama? David's like, I need a sword, I need a weapon, and the only weapon that's available is the weapon, the sword that he used to behead the giant on that day, that he became the David that we all know and love and respect. I mean, if you read the backstory, we're told that David, when he killed Goliath, he kept Goliath's sword as a souvenir. And later, out of gratitude for God, he took the sword and he dedicated it to God, and he gave it to the high priest. It was basically his way of saying, "God, I recognize that it was you who delivered me against Goliath with this weapon. It wasn't me, and so I want to give you back this weapon as a reminder that I'm dependent on you and that you are always there for me." So there was so much emotion and so much significance for David around the sword of Goliath. And we've just got to ask, what happened to that clear-eyed, confident, humble shepherd boy that walked down into that valley and faced Goliath in the first place? What happened to that young kid? I mean, what happened to the kid that ran towards danger as opposed to now running away from danger? What happened to the poet that wrote these words, "I will fear no evil, for God, thou art with me"? And where's that David? Where's that faith? Where's that confidence in God? And the answer is this: anger, loneliness, and fear. I mean, we know this, don't we? These three giants have the potential to cause us to forget all of the defeated giants in our past. And David gets a visual reminder of that. He is shown a visual aid to remind him of God's faithfulness and God's power in Goliath's sword, and he completely misses it. The priest replied, it is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want it, take it. There's no sword here but that one. And David said this, he said, there is none like it. So go ahead and give it to me. And this would be the decision that David would regret for the rest of his life. And it would become, like all of our decisions do, it would become a permanent part of the rest of his life. But this is where our story kind of intersects with the story of David, doesn't it? Because here we are, right here, is that when we need God most, when we need God most, we are least apt to lean in that direction most of the time. When we need God most, we are tempted to run away rather than towards. We opt for things that never worked before and didn't get us where we are, and that often lead us to regret, and that's what David is doing. So David takes Goliath's sword, and just to show you where this goes, and it's easy to be critical of David, but we all have our version of this. David takes Goliath's sword, and he knows he has to leave the country, so guess where he goes? He goes to the land of the Philistines. I mean, that's a smart move, isn't it? Israel's biggest enemy at the time now. And not only that, it gets a little bit worse. He goes to the city of Gath. Do you remember who was from Gath? Yeah, Goliath was from Gath. So he goes to the Philistines, and he goes to the leader of the Philistines, and he says, I want to join your army. I want to fight for you, and I want to fight against Israel, my own people. And they're not buying it. They're like, there's no way you want to join our army. We know who you are. You may think we don't know who you are, but you're David. Everybody knows who you are. You slew Goliath, and don't tell us you're not. You're carrying his sword, right? And so now David becomes really afraid because he's surrounded by his enemies, and now what's he going to do? And so he begins to pretend like he's insane. I mean, he starts, if you read the story, he starts scratching at the wooden door with his fingernails. He starts slobbering all over himself. I mean, you should read your Bible. This is all in the Bible. But he starts slobbering all over himself. And the king, the leader of the Philistines, he's like, look, I got enough fools in my court as it is. I don't need one more. Get this guy out of here. So David flees the Philistine, and he goes to live in a cave because he just doesn't know what else to do. And finally, he kind of comes to his senses. And he goes back to Israel, and he finds another prophet. And he goes to this particular prophet, and he says, look, I've really messed up. And he said, would you tell me what God's word is? Would you tell me what God's will for my life is? Would you tell me what my next move should be? Because I can't see what God wants me to see, and so I need your help. I need your counsel. But the problem was, the damage was done. When David was with Ahimelech, looking for food and looking for a weapon, there was someone else there as well. He's got a guy named Doeg was there. And Doeg was actually the king's chief herdsman. And so he saw David there with Ahimelech. And he overheard just part of the conversation, not the whole conversation, but he heard just enough information to be confused about it, and he got it wrong. And so he goes to King Saul, and he says, I know where David is. He went to Ahimelech to get advice. And he says, and King, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but the chief priest, he sided with your enemy, David. And here's how the conversation went. Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for him. This is Doeg speaking. And he also gave him provisions, and he gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. In other words, he fed him, and he armed your enemy. And the king is just furious. And we're told this, then the king sent for the priest Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, and all of the men of his family who were priests at Nob. And they all came to the king, and they have no idea what's going on. And the king said to them, why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, giving him bread and a sword and inquiring of God for him, so that he has rebelled against me and lies in wait for me as he does today? But Ahimelech, he's just like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? That's not what happened. I don't know what you're talking about. And he answers the king, and he says, who of all your servants is as loyal as David? the king's son-in-law, captain of your bodyguard, and highly respected in your household. I mean, he's saying nobody's more loyal to you than David, and his reputation in the community is that he is as loyal as they come. He's your bodyguard. You've trusted him with your own life. It says, what that day, was that day the first time I inquired of God for him? Of course not. Let not the king accuse your servant or any of his father's family, for he's like, I don't know anything about this. For your servant knows nothing at all about this whole affair. But the king said, you will surely die, Ahimelech, you and your whole family. Because King Saul's just crazy. And he's afraid and he's paranoid. And then Saul did something really, really foolish. It says, then the king ordered the guards at his side. And here's what he told. He said, turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because they too have sided with David. They knew he was fleeing, yet they did not tell me. But the king's officials were unwilling to raise a hand to strike the priests of the Lord. They essentially said to King Saul, they said, King Saul, we will kill your enemies, but we will not kill the priests of God. That's going too far, and that is the line we will not cross, and we will not be a part of it. But Doeg was in the same room. He was still there, and he's thinking to himself, this is a really good opportunity to get in good with the king. And so Doeg raises his hand, and he says, if they won't do it, I will. And Doeg slaughters 85 priests that day. But Saul isn't finished. He says, now I want you to go down to Nob, Doeg, and I want you to kill every woman, every man, every child, and every infant. They even killed all of the animals in the village. And very few people escaped the slaughter there at Nob. And one of them was Elimelech's sons. And he flees and he finds David. And when he finds David, he falls at his feet and he tells David the entire story. And David is just broken. And the text tells us this, says, here's what he says. He says, I am responsible for the death of your whole family. David was responsible for the death of an entire village. Why? Because when we take matters into our own hands, sometimes it feels good. It just doesn't always turn out good. So I want to ask you a couple of questions real quickly as we just think about how this story intersects with our lives, because this is just common for all of us. There's going to be times in our lives when anger pushes us to do things, when we know we shouldn't do. There's going to be times in our lives when these three emotions want to be the boss of us. And our sense of isolation or loneliness, suddenly we're considering things that we would tell other people they have no business doing or considering. But they become live options for us because these emotions can be so powerful. So here's the first question I want to leave you with. It's the question, what? What is your loneliness, anger, or fear causing you to consider right now that you've never considered before? I mean, relationally, financially, physically, professionally, some sort of risk you've never considered before. What is your loneliness, anger, or fear causing you to consider that you've never considered before? And then here's the real wake-up call question. This is the question that David totally missed, and it's understandable. He was 22 years old. And he was by himself. But this is the wake-up call. And maybe it needs to be some of our wake-up calls. Who besides you do your considerations put at risk? Who besides you do these options that, again, were never options before, but suddenly they're live options now? Who do these options put at risk other than just you? And I can go ahead and give you the answer to that one. It's the people that you love most and who love you the most. That's who's most at risk with these. Who else's future hangs in the balance of your decision to give in to the impulses caused by anger, loneliness, or fear? And then one last question. What advice would you give to someone who was you? What would you tell yourself? And here's the great thing about that question. We know the advice that David would give us, right? And not 22-year-old David. We're talking about grown-up King David who would actually later give us the advice. And here's what he would say, and here's what he would write. He would say, the Lord is a refuge for the oppressed, the stronghold in times of trouble. David would tell us, he would say, I took refuge in my ability to control outcomes, and the outcome was a disaster. So don't do what I do when you're angry, lonely, or afraid. And he would write this, those who know your name, God, trust in you, for you, Lord, have never forsaken those who seek you. David would say, I thought God had forsaken me, but I was wrong. I was mistaken. God was with me the whole time. And do you know what David would tell you? He would say, don't make the same mistake. He would say, don't let anger, loneliness, or fear become the boss of you. You control those emotions so those emotions don't control you. And we're going to pick it up right there next week, so don't miss next week. Let me pray for you. God, thank you for this story. I thank you for David and for the good and the bad in his life, that we can learn from it. And as tragic as this story is, I thank you that it's a reminder that you are with us. And so when these emotions begin to push us in those directions that we naturally think we need to go, I pray that we would remember this story and we would take a step back and we would reflect on all the giants that you've slayed in our past. And we will remember that even though we feel lonely and feel like we're by ourselves and you're not in our presence, that you actually are. So help us not to make these same mistakes when these emotions, when anger, loneliness, and fear begin to become the boss of us. Help us to take control of them so they don't control us. In Christ's name I pray, amen. Let's stand and sing one more time as we head out.